This is a Europhile review of Caverna the Cave Farmers, and it's the second Europhile review of Caverna the Cave Farmers that I've made already today, because this review is specifically for people who are already experienced with Agricola, where the other review is for people who have not played Agricola. So if you haven't played Agricola, go and watch that review first, and then if you're still interested in seeing the differences, you can come and watch this one as well. So Caverna, the Cave Farmers, is the brand new sequel to Agricola by Uwe Rosenberg, which was released at Essen just a couple of weeks ago. And already people are talking a lot about it, as you'd expect, and discussing whether this replaces Agricola. Is it better than Agricola? Is there any need to own Agricola anymore? And how does this actually differ? Now, the truth is, this is a very similar game to Agricola. It's essentially the same game, but with tweaks and modifications, and they do have quite a significant impact on the feel of the game for somebody who's very experienced with Agricola. Now, personally, Agricola is my absolute favourite game, and so I was extremely eager to play this. Now, I like all Uwe Rosenberg games. I'm not a, well, that's maybe slightly over the top. I don't know about all his old card games and that sort of thing, but I'm not one of the people who fall into the camp of, oh, I love Agricola, but I hate Le Havre. No, I love Le Havre, I love Agricola, I love At the Gates of Loyang. I haven't played Ora et Labora, but I like the two-player versions. You know, I'm a big fan of this whole family of games, so I was very much looking forward to Caverna. So let's have a little look at how things differ here. So the first thing that you will notice is that on your player board, you no longer have just a farm. You also have this mountain region where you can place tiles to develop as you build out into the mountain and create spaces where you can place rooms, such as this dwelling that we have here and this breakfast room that we have here. Now, obviously, this board is set up as if it was mid-game. At the beginning of the game, you have a completely empty board. One aspect of this board that you don't get in Agricola is that when you build over certain regions, you gain bonuses. So, for example, if I built into this region here, I would gain 2 food. Or if I built into this region here, I would gain 1 food. Or if I built up into this forest up here, I'm going to find myself a pig, and so on and so forth. So that's a minor change from Agricola. The other thing you'll notice here is the fences here. The fences are drawn on these tiles. Now, there are spaces, as you can see on this one, where you can have pastures without fences. You first got to chop down the trees, which is similar to in Agricola Farmers of the Moor, and it'll give you wood for doing so. But in order to put fences around, you do spend wood, but essentially you just have a new tile, and that will give you a certain number of points that's printed in the top corner. So we no longer have fences, and we no longer have the restrictions on where these tiles go. So you don't have to have the fields, the ploughed fields, next to each other, and you don't have to have the fenced regions next to each other. Now, that does take out one of the small portions of Agricola where you're planning the layout of your farm to make the best use of the space, but it's not a major change, and it's not something that I particularly miss when I'm playing this game. Perhaps the biggest change in this game is this idea of weapons and expeditions. So you'll notice that these 2 dwarves here both have these little symbols on them with numbers. Now that means that they have weapons of various values. So this guy has got a really powerful weapon, strength 13. I think the strongest weapon you can get up to is strength 14, yeah. So he's really strong. This guy's only got 4. Now, the odd thing about this is that these weapons are never going to be used for fighting with anybody, so they're not really weapons at all. They're more like tools, but you use them when you go on expeditions. So let's talk a little bit about expeditions. Expeditions is one of the big new changes in this game that wasn't in the original Agricola. Expeditions rely on your dwarves having weapons. So this dwarf, for example, has a level 4 weapon, which he's gained over time by spending ore. He's gone on the blacksmith space and spent some ore, which he's taken from mines, ore mines, and that sort of thing. He's got a level 4 weapon. This guy's got a level 13 weapon, so he's much stronger. Now, the order that you place these is affected by what weapons they've got. So your level 4 dwarf is always going to have to be placed before your level 13, and that does have an impact on the gameplay. Now, how does the expeditions work? Well, lots of the spaces have these little symbols on like this. This one is a 1 expedition. So if I went on the logging space, I get 3 bits of wood, but I also go on an expedition. Now, because I'm a level 4, it means that when I go on the expedition, I can get any of these bits of loot that are below level 4. So I could get a pumpkin, I could get 2 bits of ore, a donkey, a stone, a sheep, a wheat, a dog, some wood, or I can upgrade all my dwarf's weapons in one go. But because it's a level 1 expedition, I can only do one of those things. Whereas if I took the blacksmithing space, which is up here, this one is a level 3. Okay, and this one is a level 2. So on these ones, I would still be limited by how strong my weapon is, but I would here be able to take 3 different things, or here I'd be able to take 2 different things. So that's how expeditions work. There's no fighting other dwarfs here, or anything like that. What you're doing is grabbing a pig, or grabbing a sheep, or grabbing a cow, or some wheat, or something like that. So really what we're doing is powering up their tools, I guess, using the ore to build these useful items. So that's how expeditions work. One thing that I really like in this game, and I think is a real enhancement of Agricola, is the animal placement has been elaborated on. So now we can have sheep in an unfenced area, as long as they have a dog guarding them. Okay, they can still go in the fenced area, but if they have a dog guarding them, then that's fine. You can only have 1 more sheep than you've got dogs. So if I had 2 dogs in there, then I could have 3 sheep, or 3 dogs in there, I could have 4 sheep, and so on. Now, dogs can be placed anywhere on the board. You know, they don't need a specific place because they just roam around. So you can just place them wherever you like if they're not guarding sheep. Pigs, again, they can go in a fenced region here, or you can have a stable in the woods. If you put a stable in the woods, you can have 1 sheep in it. You'll also find 1 pig, rather. You can also find pigs, or wild boar, I should be calling them, shouldn't I? When you build tiles over certain bits of forest. So you can find pigs in the forest, which is great. Cows, yeah, you're not going to get cows from any action spaces. You're going to get cows from going on expeditions, and they're quite valuable. Cows, they're worth 3 food, as opposed to a sheep, which is only worth 1 food. So they're quite hard to come by, cows. I guess you're going out and you're giving magic beans on your expedition and getting yourself some cows, or something like that. Donkeys. Donkeys can either go, again, in a fenced region, or you can have 1 donkey in each of your mines. So here I've got a ruby mine and an ore mine. Okay. You can also have 2 animals, a pair of animals, they have to be the same type, living in your house with you. Okay, a bit like the pet you used to have in Agricola. And then there are these various room upgrades. This one's called the breakfast room. This one lets you have 3 cows in it. So you can place that on a cavern there. There's one rather oddly called the cuddle room, which lets you put as many sheep in it as you have dwarves. So there we go. That's how the animal sort of placement works. And I quite like that we've got more variety in where you can put animals. It's still hard to find space for all your animals. Sometimes you're going to have to eat animals rather than place them. They still breed in the same way that they do in Agricola during the harvests. So a lot of it's similar, and a lot of the scoring, particularly in the basic game, is based around which animals you have. But they score differently to Agricola, in that every animal scores you 1 point, even the dogs. All animals 1 point each. There's no limit on it, and there's no thresholds you have to reach to get the points. Just 1 point per animal. And the other thing is we don't have to cook them anymore. You can just convert them straight into food, just eat them raw. You don't have to cook the animals anymore. Okay, the next difference from Agricola that I want to discuss, and this one I'm not so sure that I'm fond of, is the double actions. Practically every action that you have on here, it's not every action, but most of them have a double action. So here, for example, I take a food, the food accumulates, this is sustenance, but I also gain a grain from the supply, or a wheat, and I get to turn some of my forests into a ploughed field and just an empty pasture there. So I get to do all three of these things on this space, which seems great, you know, but I suppose what's bothering me about this, I think it's the fact that it makes the game less intuitive. What I really liked about Agricola, particularly when teaching new players, was that I could go, right, you go here, you get wood. You go here, you get stone. You go here, you turn your wood into fences. And it was all simple. Okay, here we've got forest exploration. I'm going to grab a pile of wood. I'm also going to get a vegetable. Here, strip mining. It'll start off with some ore, and then it's going to build up with stone, and then you're going to get some wood as well. And over here, logging. Well, you start off with 3 wood. And then each additional turn, you're adding 1 wood, unless it's empty, in which case you're adding 3 wood. And when you go there, you take all the wood, and you go on an expedition. Over here, housework. I gain a dog, or I furnish a cavern. You know, this is not complicated stuff, and it's not that it's not there in Agricola. It's just here, it's so much more, and it makes it harder to explain what exactly you're doing, and it takes away a little bit of the theme of the game. Because, I mean, starting player here, I'm getting the starting player marker, and I'm getting food, and I'm getting ore. Okay, it just, the story is slightly diluted, because it's not quite clear what I'm doing thematically in order to achieve these things, and that makes everything slightly less intuitive. It's not part of the game that I particularly favour over Agricola. I like the simplicity, the streamlined, I do this, I get this, that you get in Agricola. So that's the double actions. I think that's a hangover from Farmers of the Moor, really, with its additional action spaces and choices from the different action spaces. But you know, it doesn't. I'm not saying this makes it a bad game, but to me, that's not an enhancement over Agricola. We've mentioned about the food and cooking, so let's have a look at that and how that differs to Agricola. So I'm just going to have a look at this portion of the board here. So this portion of your board tells you how you can get food. So 1 point or 1 dog is worth no food. 2 points or a donkey or a sheep or a bit of wheat is worth 1 food. 3 points or a pig or a ruby or a pumpkin is 2 food. A cow is 3 food. 2 donkeys is 3 food. And 4 points is 3 food. So no longer do we have to have ovens and cooking hearths and all the rest of it. That's all gone. Now you can have food whenever you like. Okay, and the tension in the game is significantly reduced as a result. One of the big bits that gave tension and stress to Agricola was, I need to get some food. I need to get a food engine going. And if you watch a really good Agricola player playing this game for the first time, they're getting that food engine going, getting it going, where the other players who haven't played it before, they're sitting back and they go, well, I know I'll have enough food anyway because I'll just convert this ruby into a couple of food and I'll just cook a donkey, or, you know, I'll just eat a donkey, eat him raw, I don't even need to cook him. And so on and so forth. It's not as stressful as playing Agricola. Some players are going to love that, because I've often heard lots of players complain about the stress in Agricola. I loved the stress in Agricola. I miss it. I want to have ovens. I want to have to cook. I want to have to think about those future harvests. So that's something for me which is missing from this game. Another big thing that is missing from the game, and this has been talked about quite a bit already, is the cards. We no longer have minor improvements and occupations. Instead, we have this board that is full of tiles, and this really is a hangover from All Creatures Big and Small. So we have to use a space on the board, an action space, in order to furnish a cavern. So first thing we have to do is get a cavern, so that's the first thing. Then we furnish a cavern, and there's various spaces that do it. And then we pay a wood and a stone. Most of them are a wood and a stone, or a couple of wood and a couple of stones. Some of them need other things, vegetables or ore and that sort of thing. Oh no, this is actually not stone, this is ore. At the end of the game, it's going to give you 1 point, and it lets you keep 1 farm animal on each empty field. Simple effects on these different tiles. There's a ton of them. They're all present in every game. No variability like in the cards, no drafting, they're just all there. This is the family setup. If I reverse the boards, I've got double the number of tiles. Now that's not as daunting as it first seems, because after a few games, you pretty much know what tiles are there. You've seen most of them. You've thought about them. They're logical stuff. Well, this one gives you points for rubies. This one gives you points for vegetables and grain. This one gives you points for farm animals. This one gives you points for stone. It's not complicated stuff. You know that most of the time there's going to be one there that is going to give you points for the thing that you're collecting. So these, for me, are not as interesting as the cards in Agricola, and they certainly don't give the same degree of variability as you get in Agricola. The other thing that I think is a bit of a shame about these tiles is that we lose the lovely Clemens Franz artwork from Agricola. These are Agricola cards with these lovely characters on them. This is a big draw for me in Agricola. I know, maybe it's wrong to be thinking so much about the artwork of it, but I like this. This gives character to the game, where it's all writing and iconography. They get placed on your board, and you end up with a board that looks a bit like a sort of Excel spreadsheet rather than like a real sort of house full of rooms or characters or whatever. I know there's no room for the artwork on here, and the artwork that is on there, the tiny little artwork, is as detailed as ever, but it's so small and so difficult to see, and there's no real character to it, and I think that's a shame. It ends up being a little bit like that board in Puerto Rico, where you've just got a load of stuff, buildings that are just writing, really. They don't really look like the buildings that they are. They've got a title, but the title isn't really depicted in the picture in any way. Again, not a massive point, but it is a difference from Agricola, and it's something that I feel when I'm playing the game that has changed that, and at the moment it feels like something's missing. The other thing is, of course, the variability, which we've mentioned, which is absent in this game, where in Agricola you've got almost infinite variability because of all that different card play. Some people didn't like the fact that the cards it's a random draw, so there's some luck there about whether you get a good hand of cards or not, which could be mitigated a little bit by the drafting variants, but some people will be glad to see the back of those cards. I know they will. I've spoken to people who didn't like the cards. So for some people that'll be great. Another thing that is absent from this game, I think, again, because of the lack of cards, is that we lose interaction. A lot of those cards in Agricola, actually probably, I hesitate to say a lot, but some of those cards in Agricola meant that if I do this, then that's going to mean it's going to have an impact on the other players in this way. If I take this, you gain a grain, or I take this, you lose this. We don't have that sort of interaction in the game anywhere. There's no interaction in this game beyond blocking spaces. So we still have that. That's still a big factor in the game. I'm going to take this space to prevent you having it. I'm going to take this action space to prevent you having it. Although, interestingly, me accidentally pointing at this one, imitation lets you use an action space that's already been occupied by another player. So that's a new addition to the game as well, although it's going to cost you 4 food in order to do it. Another thing that is different from Agricola is the solo game. In this game, because you've lost that variability of the cards, the solo game is identical every time you play it. Even the action spaces are the rules tell you exactly which cards come up at exactly which point. So we're no longer even randomized in terms of the rounds. Round 1 in the solo game is always in a strict order. Okay, that's not true in the main game. In the main game, we have randomized to a degree within the rounds, the same as you have in Agricola. But the solo game, and it doesn't have that incremental scoring of a sort of solo series. It just says try and score 100. Okay, I liked the solo series. I liked trying to score, whatever it was, 50 and then 60 and hanging on to one of your cards and then 70 and building up through a series of games. None of that in this game. Although I'm sure people can come up with house rules to make that work, but again, it's something that I miss. Finally, I need to talk about points, because in this game, you can score points for loads of stuff. You score points for farm animals and dogs, 1 point. You score you lose points for any missing farm animal. You score half a point for grain, you score 1 point per vegetable, 1 per ruby, 1 per dwarf, you lose 1 per unused space, and then you score points for the stuff on the tiles. There's none of these thresholds that you get in Agricola. You don't have to have, 4 sheep to score 2 points. That would be 4 points. The same as for cows, even though cows are harder to get. So some people talking about this game have suggested that creates allows you to specialise, and that's kind of true. I could have a board absolutely packed full of sheep and it will score me loads of points. That's very true, but you can't strictly stick to one strategy because you're going to get marked down for any farm animals that are missing. And more importantly, you're going to get marked down for any spaces on the board that haven't been filled, which means you're going to have to fill up your mountain region of the board, and you're going to have to fill up your farm region of the board, which means really you're going to be diversifying into every aspect of the game if you're going to score lots of points. So that specialisation isn't really there. You're still going to have to do a bit of everything, just like you had to do in Agricola. Which I personally, I had never had a problem with that. I like that. I want to do a bit of everything. So that's not a downside for me, but for some people who were looking for more specialisation in this game and didn't like the fact that in Agricola you had to do a bit of everything, you're still going to have to do a bit of everything, frankly. Most things are going to give you points. Now, I'm not sure what I think about this points thing, the fact that everything gives you points. It turns the game, it becomes a little bit like a Stefan Feld game, you can do anything. You can take any one of these actions, they're all going to give you points. I don't know, no, it's fine. It's fine. I shouldn't really moan about that. That's fine. I'm a bit sick of that in Feld games, but in this game, because of the theme, it doesn't feel wrong. It's nice that if you're building stuff, you're getting points. If you're grabbing animals, you're getting points. I think that's probably a good thing, and certainly the rooms that you add to your cave will push you in one particular direction or another in order to increase the points that you can have. So those, as I can see it, are the most significant changes from Agricola. Do they make it a better game? No, not in my view. I don't think they do. Do they make it a worse game? Possibly. But it's minor, This is a really, really good game. I may have sounded really negative throughout this review, and I didn't mean to. It's a really good game, but what it is an alternative to Agricola. To me, it's not an enhancement of Agricola, and it doesn't detract that much from Agricola. It's an alternative. Now I've got a choice. I can play Agricola, or I can play Agricola Farmers of the Moor, or I can play Caverna, or I can play any one of the other games in that Harvest family, Le Havre, at the Gates of Loyang, or at Labora, the 2-player games, and I'll have a different experience. But Caverna, it just feels like an alternate version of Agricola. The benefits over Agricola, it's got all the lovely wooden pieces in it. They all come with it, okay, and they barely fit in the box. Really great value for money, it's an expensive game, but it is packed full of stuff. It's hard to fit everything back in that box. It plays up to 7 players, although I think it would take a long time to play it with 7 players, which Agricola didn't. And I'm sure there'll be a ton of expansions and all the rest of it, which will probably increase the variability, which I've been complaining about. I haven't mentioned that infinite loop on the tiles. Essentially, I think you can probably forget about it, but there are 4 tiles in this game which interact together in such a way that give you infinite points. You can either leave one of the tiles out, you can alter the rules slightly, or I'm pretty sure Uwe Rosenberg is going to come up with a solution to this very soon. I wouldn't let it worry you, I wouldn't let it put you off the game. There are so many of these tiles, as I say, this is just like half. There's a whole load of others in the box for the full game. And frankly, it's quite hard to achieve that combo, and if you are trying to achieve it, then well, just don't do it. Who wants infinite points? Where's the fun in that? So I think that will soon be fixed, so I wouldn't let that worry you. But for now, people are talking about it quite a lot on the forums, and so I thought it's worth a mention. This is a good game. It's well worth getting if you like Agricola. Even if you don't like Agricola, maybe this will fix some of the problems for you. If you didn't like the stress in Agricola, this will fix it. If you didn't like what else? The sort of, if you didn't like all the cards, if you found all of that too complicated, this will go some way towards fixing that, although you might find those rooms quite daunting at first. It's an alternative, and it's really good, so it's well worth having a look.